This is Jerry Barrett talking. Today's date is May 21st, 1986. I'm interviewing Edwina Gilbert at Eastern Airline headquarters in Miami. Would you start by just talking a little bit about what you did before you came with Eastern, and then talk a little bit about your career here, the various jobs you held at Eastern?
All right. Prior to coming to Eastern Airlines, I was working full-time at what was then the First National Bank of Miami and going to the University of Miami. And then one day just decided to apply for a job as a flight attendant. I wanted an opportunity, incidentally, to decide what to do career-wise while traveling around, and someone was paying me to do that, and being a flight attendant was the only way to accomplish that. And so I flew as a flight attendant in New York for 6 months, and then in Miami for 5, and went to the flight attendant training school as an instructor. I taught potential new stewardesses for several years, and then I became the manager of the training school. And I stayed in that role for more years than I like to admit. And from there, I became the vice president of in-flight services. It was at that time where the women's movement was very strong. I was one of the women in the company, and at the time women were in manager jobs. No one was a director at the time, no females. So the jump was significant to go from manager to officer, but it was timely, and I was in the right place at the right time. And I've been in that role for 16 years, and with the company for 30. And that's, here I am today.
Okay. Very interesting. Is the flight attendants school here in Miami?
Yes.
Is Miami?
Yes.
So most of your work has been done here?
With the exception of the first 6 months of my career in New York, it's always been in Miami.
What does being vice president of in-flight service mean? What does that involve?
It involves the 8 domestic domiciles of flight attendants, which are 7,500 flight attendants, and we have 3 former Barrett airline flight attendant bases in South America. Started with 5, but 1 is closed now. 1 is in Peru, which is not operating. And also dining services. And that is the menu development, purchasing of all the food, catering contracts. We cater airplanes in something like 22 countries and 100 cities. We have 2 major caterers. One is a $100 million a year contract. So our budget in in-flight services is well over $400 million. And I know where all the money is.
Boy, that's a big task.
But I have a lot of very good help. My single greatest strength is in the selection of other people. I mean, I'm surrounded by talent in my organization. There is no way for me to fail.
That's reassuring, if you pick the right people.
Oh, they're outstanding. I don't tell them that every day, but they are.
Are you seen somewhat as the expert on the flight attendants?
Depends. Sometimes yes. During negotiations, no. I'm excluded.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yes. Incidentally, that's an industry problem. The human resource, if you will, in industrial relations organizations, are not so sure that operating people or the officers of the employee group that's an organizer really can go through the negotiation process. I have a very difficult time with that. I, incidentally, impose myself frequently. I am not included in the formal negotiations, and I believe that's as it should be, incidentally. But they pretty well go down the path. It's getting better since Jack Johnson came here.
By that you mean that there's more consultation
Yes.
to, if they're thinking about doing a certain thing, they would run that by you in effect.
Oh, absolutely, right down to even if we terminated a flight attendant, and the industrial relations boys wanted to make an agreement to bring someone back to work, they didn't even ask in-flight services if it was all right. They just made their deal. Called us and said, we put so-and-so back to work. Now, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Leonard have changed that.
So there's some real consultation.
They contact me and say the union wants to make a deal on so-and-so flight attendant. And I call the people that fired him. Say, could you live with taking them back?
Okay. That does make a lot more sense, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, because we resented it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a natural thing. You work very hard. You're very careful if you take action against an employee, because not only you're taking their mortgage payment away from them, their car payment. I mean, you're really dramatically affecting someone's life to fire them from their job. So I believe that my people are very careful when they make that decision. And then when someone sits over here, puts them back to work without counseling with us, it was a problem. That's changed.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the flight attendant's job?
Yes. In that it's some people think it's a part-time job, frivolous, and that they all make too much money. All right? It is a part-time job in that they probably work maximum of 16 days a month. They are gone away from their home during that 16-day period, 220, 230 hours. So they're away from home nights more than the average, other than a salesman. They're conscientious. 80% of them are highly professional. They know their relationship with the customer is primary in their job. That in the event of an incident, that they're held with that whole responsibility of properly handling that situation. And in addition to that, they're responsible for entertaining the customer while on board the airplane. And the most inexpensive form of entertainment on an airplane is food.
The most inexpensive form
of entertainment. And what you do when you go through the cocktail dining process is entertain people, because they're going to be there for 2 hours, 3 hours, and that's what people need. They can't be somewhere that long without moving, without some source of entertainment. And I see that as dining service.
Mm-hmm.
And I consider it very inexpensive method of providing that entertainment. Look at our Ionosphere Lounge. In our Ionosphere Lounge, we put television sets up and around because the customer's going to be there an hour. We got to entertain them.
So that's a big part of the job then, really.
The flight attendant job has changed in that she's number one allowed to, he, but he was always allowed to get married. She's allowed to marry now. She's allowed to take time off to have her children and retain her seniority, accrue. So the profile has changed. She's now the young mother with family responsibilities who doesn't want to be away from home 220 hours a month. So there's personal conflict going on with flight attendant. She grounds for reasons that are different in the last 10 years. The babies are sick rather than she's sick.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately that leads her to fibbing. She calls in and grounds and says, "I'm sick." She isn't. The baby is.
Oh, okay.
So she has some personal problem with the way she's making decisions in her life. The things that she's done now, a little bit dishonest. She struggles with that.
And of course, the absenteeism is a problem to the corporation.
Right now-
scheduling and
Right now, our absenteeism with flight attendants is at 7.3%. Now that's down from during the trauma of January, February, and March. Absenteeism was 10-15% every day. We had 1,000 people out sick a day
oh,
and did not cancel one trip. But it's only because the people in the field are so good, they're just magical.
just the scheduling problem on something like that, of getting people in
I have,
to a place.
we also have our own scheduling organization within in-flight services, and very prideful, because one of the goals I have for them is thou shalt not cancel a flight for no flight attendants. Find them. And they do. If they have to go up in the terminal and meet an inbound trip and say, "I need you," they do it.
That's pretty darn good, that really is, yeah. Has the job in the plane, has it changed over the years?
The fundamentals, no. Flight attendants like to say it has,
Mhm.
but no. The airplanes are bigger, but there are more flight attendants to do the job. The change may be in the traveler. See, there's a change in the flight attendant in that she's maturing. She has other obligations. She's not that single person
Mhm.
who's having a good time. She's not the single person who's going to be in a job 18 months or 3 years. It's now her career.
Mhm.
She's made a commitment. Time off is great, the money is good, more time for her private life. And so, in the industry, we call that the golden handcuffs, in that the job change, the job pay and time off changed so much that we put golden handcuffs on them. They're making too much money with too much time for too much time off to quit to do something else. So they stay with it. It's likened to me what we've done to the cleaners, the guys that clean airplanes.
Mhm.
A man is young and he's going to get married and he gets a job as a cleaner on an airplane to get his foot in the door. Okay? And his family starts growing, children. And the job salary keeps changing. And we're suddenly paying this guy $13 an hour to clean an airplane. We've trapped him. He's trapped. And his children are growing up and they say, "What does your daddy do?" "My daddy cleans airplanes." Something happens to the man, because that wasn't the plan.
Mhm.
His plan was to start out as a cleaner, move on to the ramp, become a mechanic, and move his life.
Mhm.
But we kept escalating the salary. And it was safe, secure. He stayed in the job to go home and have his children say, "My daddy's an airplane cleaner." Something happens to the man, he resents it, hates his job. It's a terrible,
Mhm.
we've done that.
That's very interesting. And you're saying...
To me, it's what we've done to the people of Puerto Rico. One of the things, I've been flying to Puerto Rico for years. To get food stamps is easy. To collect unemployment is easy. The children of Puerto Rico are being raised to stand in line for food stamps. What happens to pride? What happens to we go out and earn our own way of living? I could go on for hours.
But you're saying the same thing has happened to some extent with the flight attendants as well?
The flight attendants, the job is highly desirable, sought after. There's a little bit of glamour to it, although there really isn't. The idea of it is glamorous.
Okay.
And they make a lot of money. and they bid a line of flying. And they fly a line that they fly 12 days a month, 14 days a month, and walk away with 25 and 28 and $29,000 a year. Not bad.
Mm-hmm.
Not bad.
Sounds good. Yes, yes.
It's a tough job.
Mhm.
You know, you forget the part that you have a layover somewhere in a hotel that you don't feel is really very clean. The carpeting in the room is never quite dry and the bathtub's never quite washed. That's part of what goes with that job. Standing in the rain waiting for the bus to pick you up to take you to the hotel. To get to the hotel for the room not to be ready. All the other parts of the job that keep saying, why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I keep doing this?
Those are the parts that the customer doesn't see. Mm-hmm. But they have to live with.
Mm-hmm.
One issue that I've heard a good bit about at Eastern is productivity. Can you talk about productivity with respect to the flight attendants?
Yes. Contractual language is designed whereby we have what we call credit rigs. All right? And that is paying people for on-duty time or away from base time. Flight attendant is credited with 1 hour of flying for every 3 hours on a layover, or it's 4 hours now. So it's called credit time. They're not flying on airplanes. It's not block hour utilization, but it's what we call the wedge, that non-productive time that's built in. Our productivity has improved with our last contract because we changed one of our duty rigs slightly. Productivity relates to how many actual hours is the employee spending on an airplane. And the more hours you can get them credited with for flying rather than laying over somewhere. But credit time was created because years ago pilots and flight attendants were flown 100 hard hours a month. I'll give you an example so you can better understand this. We have a trip that goes Miami-Nassau, Nassau-Miami. It's an hour trip. It's 2 hours of flying a day. Well, we had to fly her every day. And she's only working 2 hours a day. But she came to the airport 28 days. And she said, I don't want to work 7 days a week to fly 2 hours. Fix the trip.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we couldn't fix the trip. So the union comes in and says, minimum of 4 hours and 30 minutes a day. So instead of crediting her with 2 hours, we had to credit her with 4 hours and 30 minutes. Because it's not her fault we can't repair the trip. She's saying, hey, don't make me work 20, fine, I'm only working 2 hours. But I have to get dressed, I have to park my car, I have to check in, I have to do a briefing, to fly somewhere for an hour, turn around and come back for an hour. So some of it, we can all sit back and say, terrible, oh my God, look what the unions are doing. Some of it we ask for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We created some of the problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But see, I of the mind, particularly because I was so involved in employee involvement, that what you do is come together, maybe in a different arena than at a negotiating table, and say, hey, let's look at this. Let's make exceptions here, exceptions here, exceptions here, rather than blanket credit rigs and blanket layover problems.
Look at the individual situation, in other words, and try to adapt to that. I see. You just mentioned employee involvement. Can you tell what you have done in that?
All right, let me go back to the Boeing company, which, because we bought so many Boeing airplanes, I was one of the officers assigned to the 757. And so we spent a lot of time at Boeing.
This was in the development of the plane and
And
the
at Boeing,
fitting it.
I was amazed when you're in the hangars where they weld and design and structure and put airplanes together, how clean it was. And I was there long enough to see teams of people that at the end of the day they swept up their work. Well, I started asking about it, and Colonel Borman had noticed the same things. And that Boeing had a very successful employee involvement program, working together concepts, meeting together. So Frank had a presentation made to the officers, senior officers, and I was not there. But several weeks later, my boss at the time, who was Russ Ray, the head of marketing, called me and said, I want you to go to a meeting on this date in this place to meet these people, to see if we could design employee involvement at Eastern Airlines. I later learned that he should have asked me if I would volunteer to do that. Okay?
Yes, yes.
I later learned he didn't follow the basic fundamental concept in the beginning. So we went to this meeting, and there were several officers, directors, and managers there. There were 12 of us. With some consultants that were going to introduce the fundamental concepts. Now, when we got into this meeting for an hour, the hostility of the attendees started surfacing. Resented being there, resented the assignment, been through too many of these kinds of projects at the company. Well, venting took 2 days. And finally the consultant said to us, we would like people to stay on this project who think that we could possibly make employee involvement work at Eastern Airlines. And we want a team of 12, 3 of whom will be vice presidents, to research employee involvement concepts in this country and in the outside in Japan, Germany, where else it's worked. To research, study, and within X number of months make a recommendation to Colonel Borman and the senior officers whether or not employee involvement could work at Eastern Airlines. Well, we set about to do our homework.
So at that point, you did volunteer. You were free to volunteer.
Once I got hooked, yeah, I did, because I felt very strongly that was the path for us. That we had really tried so many things, and we hadn't come together in joint efforts, and that maybe that's really what we needed to do. Well, say, let's not be mad, let's just work together. And we did a lot of research. Stacks. And after many months, I've forgotten, it was several years ago, we recommended that we take it on. And we laid out a plan as to what we wanted to accomplish within the first year, second year, third year. And we set about to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And we did. Started with the IM. And incidentally, with all you've read about the IM, Charlie, whatever, they didn't trust us. I can remember an officer named George Hardy and I, he was vice president of maintenance, called Charlie, and we went to lunch with Charlie and Russ McGarry and Paul Hughes, and said, we know everyone's in negotiations, we're here for this subject. We laid out the concept, said to Charlie, you willing to try? And I will never forget Charlie Bryant looking at the table. He said, look at the 5 of us. He said, how proud are you, Winnie, to be an officer, to be an employee of Eastern Airlines? I said, very. He said, really? Where's your pin? All three of the IAM men had on their Eastern Airlines service pins, and neither one of the vice presidents sitting at the table did. I will never forget him saying, "Doesn't appear that you two are as proud as we are."
Oh, my. Wow.
So I said, George Hardy and I told them that we said, look, we would like to really separate the two. The negotiations, the grievance process, and put something together that makes us work together, that someday the two can blend. It will take years. Are you willing to start? And they were, and they did. So we got started.
And it's really started with the machinists. I mean, that.
Fundamentally, yes.
Mm-hmm.
We trained all the management first. We had an introduction program to the management. We trained first-line supervisors. And then we trained trainers. And we trained the IM. The IM did their own training. We trained them in.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't trust, of course. They said, oh, yeah, sounds wonderful, but can we trust them? They didn't trust us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure they do now. Some of them do.
Is your feeling, though, that it has been reasonably successful, the employee involvement program?
No, it was in the second and third year. It was starting to come together with the IAM more than the pilots, the flight attendants. We never got off the ground. With the non-contract employees, it moves slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Because how can you bring a group of 12 or 15 people together representing every other work unit? And so that was difficult. We did some, or they did it themselves, some wonderful things with the IAM, but we went into different problems then, more negotiations, more contingency plans, more, are we going to file Chapter 11? Are we going to have a strike? We went from one trauma to another. And, when you're constantly traumatized, you really can't get anything to gel.
Oh, okay. So there was sort of a cloud over the whole thing because of these continuing crises.
Right.
It made it difficult.
It's struggling.
Mm-hmm.
It will surface. The seed's been planted.
Uh-huh.
And, it's not nourished as much as it should be, but it's because so many other things are going on. But it'll grow. It'll get there.
It's interesting that you'd be involved with the employee involvement when your primary responsibility is with in-service employees, and yet the employee involvement didn't work there, or it hasn't worked there.
Well, it takes both sides to make it work.
Oh, okay.
It's a volunteer program.
Mm-hmm.
And we've spent almost 2 years with our union saying we want flight attendants to volunteer. They want us to pay them premium dollars.
Yeah, that's hard to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose some of the other uncertainty caused by crises influences their thinking.
I keep saying, why don't you let the flight attendants decide how they're going to get paid? See, if a flight attendant volunteers to be an employee involvement, and they schedule a meeting on this day, and 2 days, she has a 4-day trip sitting there, they want us to pay her five days of premium pay. We say that's not volunteering. That's making money by being on the committee.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can't do that. So we're deadlocked on the issue.
Oh, okay. That's unfortunate. They're actually just because of their scheduling problems different in a sense than the machinists.
Right. And see, everybody's hesitant because they don't know whether to trust the management or not. And see, I think they should. I think if they just look back at the day before Frank even became president. Frank's been saying all these years, from the very beginning, the first year he was the president, he said we have to reduce costs. The first week he was president, let's close 10 Rockefeller Plaza. Let's consolidate in one place. Let's look at our management teams. Let's reduce headcount. Let's reduce costs. First year, he kept saying to us, technology in the next 25 years isn't going to escalate like technology did in the last 10. You know, we went from props to jets to super jets. He kept saying that advancement in technology isn't going to take place.
Mm-hmm. So you got to start working with what you
From
had.
the beginning, he kept saying, and you can go back to all of his videos, all the publications, all the letters, and everybody can get angry about it. All he's ever done is ask us to give money back. But he was right. No matter how we felt about it at the time, we thought, here he goes again.
Yeah.
You cannot deny, when you look back at his history, that he was waving a red flag long before anyone else in this industry was. That's why every now and then I think, God, he has visions that none of the rest of us have.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, it's very easy to criticize him. You can walk away and say, if only he had done it this way instead of this way. But every time along the way, he brought everybody in and said, how should we do this? And we keep blaming Frank for the way it was done. We were all there. We were all there saying, yeah, do it that way.
Yeah.
But, you know, Frank's the first one to say, hey, I'm the president, I'm the chief CEO, I'm held responsible for the process. But without exception, it was always his idea. He was the one that laid awake nights and thought, we've got to do something. All the rest of us were sitting around saying, we ought to do something.
But not able to decide what to do yet.
Well, and that comes with having the strength of your convictions, to me. How do you go out and say to a workforce, we're not going to give you a raise for a year because, I mean, you back off of that immediately. You don't want to make them mad. You don't want them to slow down your airplanes.
Mm.
And so you say, oh, I got to find a better way. Well, there wasn't a better way. And Frank went out and said, hey, here's what we must do to survive. Eastern Airlines is still alive because of him. And I believe it. Now, people walk away and don't like him for that. But, you know, you walk away when you leave home as a child, resenting how strict your parent was. And then one day, you're a parent, and you think, oh, my. How smart my mom and dad were.
Yes, it's true.
And that will happen for Frank someday.
In the meantime, just personally, it must be quite frustrating for him to have been right quite a number of times.
But see, he's had his own doubts.
Pardon?
He's had his doubts. I don't believe Frank Borman will ever. I think the night that he decided not to allow the IAM to strike, the famous night, that for the rest of his life, he will redo that scene. And he will make 5 different decisions than the one he made. In his mind, in his thoughts. He has punished himself so badly over that I hurt for him. We were very angry with Frank over that decision. And he has never recovered from it. his image within this company, with its employees, said the big guns withdrew. They saw him folding, collapsing, giving in. We all did. We were all very, very angry with him because we felt in our hearts that we had worked so hard and were so prepared that to a man, to a pilot, to a flight attendant, to a secretary, to all of us, we'd have kept this damn thing. We'd have made it work. We felt it in our heart. We were ready. Frank saw things that we didn't see because we were caught up in the emotion of it, in the final right to take control of our own company. To take the IEM and just teach them a lesson. Well, I'm not so sure the IEM needed to be taught a lesson. They're only as strong as you allow them to be. But none of us could see that at the time. We were emotionally involved in, we were going to do it. We were going to show them who's boss. Well, they were going to show us who's boss. And we knew that. And see, to the majority of the people, Charlie won.
Yes.
When you can back off all by yourself, a year later and look back at it, 2 years later and look back, Frank saw things we didn't see. He saw people getting hurt. He saw bankers that weren't quite sure we would make it. He saw an airline that he didn't think could survive 15, 30 days on the brink of bankruptcy. And he walked a tight line. And he knew when he made the decision what that would do to him. And it did. It hurt him badly. He's never really recovered from that. And he just doesn't deserve that.
That really is sad, isn't it, Wade?
See, he was right. And if you just go back and chronicle all the things, he was right. Maybe if we could do some things over, we would change techniques rather than decisions. I think about him now a lot. See, I was here that morning that we sold our airline. Because it was one of my unions that we were working with. And I saw him.
That was a really traumatic day with the, 2 sets of negotiations going on? The pilots, flight attendants?
Yes.
And then the board of directors meeting?
I mean, it was... Oh, yeah, we were here days till 3 and 4 in the morning. We had a lot of company, too.
Mm-hmm. I understand that down on the first floor there where the board of directors meeting was going on, that number of employees and
I'll let you
officers
listen
that
to
come
my
over.
tape one day.
Pardon? Oh. Your recollections of what was going on that day and your thoughts about that. Huh? Is that what you're referring to? Yeah. Did you think at the time that it would... apparently there were like 3 options that people were talking about.
There were 3. We had 3 options. Reach agreements with our unions, concessionary agreements. That meant 20% wage reductions. It meant productivity improvements, significant ones. File for bankruptcy, Chapter 11, or sell our airline. But selling the airline was their second option. Never, ever was Chapter 11 discussed as a viable option. It was reach agreements sell the airline, Chapter 11. And of course, our employees were walking around saying, company wants to go Chapter 11 so they can get rid of unions. I was in all those meetings. That was last choice.
Mm-hmm.
If all else fails, and our jobs as officers with labor negotiations organizations was get agreements. Save this airline.
Mm-hmm.
I was really angry with Charlie that night.
The expression I heard was he wouldn't come to the party. Is that what you
Well,
referred to?
somehow it got into the Wall Street Journal what I said to Charlie, and that's because one of Charlie's quote consultants was with him, and the press was not here; they weren't allowed here. But I've known Charlie for a long time, and I went over and said something to Charlie, and it wound up in the Wall Street Journal. I'll never forget that. And that's because his consultant was here taking notes.
And passing it on to the press. Yeah.
But see, but he got it pretty accurate. I went over to Charlie it was about 10 o'clock at night, and said, now the flight attendants are in negotiations, the pilots are in negotiations, and we've got hope that by midnight we're going to come to the party. But I also knew that the pilots would come to the party, and the flight attendants would if Charlie did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I went over to Charlie and said, Charlie, you're going to get your 30-year pin this year, and so am I. We have a lot of pride in this company. Now you go into that meeting and give them what's necessary to give. He said, I can't. I said, why not? And he said, they want my heart. I said, you don't have one. Now, go in there and be the guy you ought to be. And he said, I can't do it. So he didn't. But they never for 1 minute thought Frank would sell this airline. But the board would. There was no choice. And that's one of the things I said on my tape. After 30 years, our jobs as officers was to reach agreements. That was, I mean, there were no choices for us, no matter what we personally thought. But once that didn't happen, I thought I would be devastated after all these years, as good as this company has been to me, that I would be devastated by the fact that we'd sold our airline. I wasn't. I was absolutely stunned at my reaction. I was crushed for Frank, hurt badly for Joe. But I was glad. I was glad it was over.
Were you even right then?
Yes.
Is that right?
Instantly.
Is that right? That is interesting.
Oh, I was even surprised at my own feelings.
Uh-huh.
I thought, and see, one of the officers came over to me and said, Winnie, at a time like this, it's all right for lady vice presidents to cry. I had no tears. And the minute he said it to me, I thought, I feel relieved that the constant trauma, the constant crises, the constant battles, the lack of stability, the inability to plan ahead, because all we did was put out fires. There was no time for researching. There was no time for 5-year planning.
Mm.
We were always busy putting out the fire, handling the next crises, planning for contingencies, planning for strikes. That the creativity and the real managerial skills, there was no time
Yes.
to find out if you had any of those. So I saw it as an opportunity. And because it was Frank Lorenzo, and we can call it Texas Air, and we can call it Gun, because it was Frank Lorenzo, I was even more excited about it.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Bright, smart, young. Oh, yeah. Frank Lorenzo with a combination like Joe Leonard. There's no way this airline could fail. This is one of the smartest young men I've ever worked for. And I've worked for 18 men in this company. He's special.
Do you think that other people, particularly other officers in the company, after a little while have sort of come to that same point of view?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But we're pretty open with one another.
Mm-hmm.
You know, each officer here could assess another officer. You're always good at, every one of us is excels at looking at the other guy and saying what he does well and what he doesn't do well.
Mm-hmm.
I have spent all these years sitting at that table just watching the men change. I've seen the officers come and go. This is the first time since I've been an officer at this company that there's a real team there. I mean, they can talk about having been a team. They never were. But to look around that table now, they've joined hands. They have meetings that are real meetings. They come to agreements. There's compromise. There's no end run. Maybe with the exception of one officer, but a functioning team.
Uh-huh.
It's great.
What's made the difference?
The men. Some men have left our company, and none of us really realized. Well, maybe we did, but you push those things aside. That the effect they had that was not positive.
Oh yeah.
And part of that was Frank's fault. And if I can find a fault, it was establishing an organization to set men up to compete with themselves for the presidency.
Mm. Which can be pretty destructive.
Well, it was.
Yeah.
They competed with one another constantly for the presidency and didn't get it. And that in itself was destructive. But we recovered from that because those of us who were not in the battle, in the run, you know, we were, the other men were keeping it all glued together because they saw what was happening and had for years.
Okay, we're back on.
It started, the other men were still here, and it started in July of 85, I guess, June, when Joe was made general manager. Joe wasn't in the politics at Eastern Airlines. Joe's just a very bright, cost-conscious, knowledgeable guy. Pleasant, a little shy. Joe came in here to do a job, and he was very impressive. And so when he became general manager, we all had, a lot of us had a new boss, and it started immediately. And then when the other two gentlemen left, and both very fine men, incidentally, and they put the new team together. David Kunstler in his job, John Nelson in his job. They started working together instead of out manipulating one another, outsmarting one another. We have presentations now where they're cohesive.
Mm-hmm.
We together have decided this is what we ought to do. It's great.
So there really is a team working
Oh, yeah.
at that level.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Frank feels it, sees it.
That's neat.
It's a very neat place. You know, I often think I have some people outside this industry that, you know, I've had a couple job offers, and they say to me, why do you keep staying there? You could be making a lot more money. And I say, where could I go to have what I have here, the constant stimuli? I believe that the employees of Eastern Airlines could go to work anywhere for anyone. We can do anything in 48 hours. We're crises oriented. We're traumatized. We've learned to handle trauma. We're been through the battle. We can do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Frank can call on the speakerphone and say, I want our flag in South America in 48 hours. Can you do it? And we say, no problem. Yeah, you want it? You got it. And we do it. That the people that leave here make a lot more money. And I talk to them, a little bored, a little bit bored. It's not as exciting. It's not as fast-paced.
Even in other parts of the industry? Is that the case?
Someone said to us, all the former vice presidents at Continental, we've probably heard from a lot of them. I heard from a lot of them since Frank Lorenzo took over our company, and they said, he's really tough to work for. Who could be tougher than Frank Borman? Who could want something in less time than Frank's wanted it? I mean, how tough could it be?
Mm-hmm.
I'm thrilled. I would like to take a sabbatical and follow Frank Lorenzo around for a year, because I see him as a very gentle, soft-spoken businessman who knows how to put things together to make money. And that's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've having been at Eastern as long as you have, you've seen other presidents, other chairmen of the board. Can you talk a little bit about earlier
I've
ones?
seen them all.
Yeah.
Yes, I've seen them all. Oh, we've had some very exciting men here. Gosh, I've been through a lot of presidents, as a matter of fact. Of course, I really tuned into presidents with a man named Malcolm McIntyre, who was the founder of the air shuttle concept. The history books really don't like to give him credit for that, but he was the one.
Mm-hmm.
And Art Lewis, who was formerly of Hawaiian Airlines, who came to our company. Art Lewis was very good. I don't know what happened in the political arena. People, men positioning for control. I see that in men. I also see it in women, but I mean, my experience is working with men. And Sam Higginbottom, Floyd Hall. Floyd was president, then chairman, and then president again. And Frank, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Joe in this role.
You're feeling right now that the corporation internally is in better shape than it's ever been then.
Absolutely.
I take it. Yeah.
Absolutely. We have some weaknesses. But I don't think there's any such thing as a totally strong organization.
Mm-hmm.
That your weaknesses are what keep making you do your homework. And see, I don't see all the men on the team as perfect team players, but that's a pretty good philosophy, don't you think? In my organization, I always have somebody working for me that doesn't like me. I always have somebody that works for me that disagrees with my decisions. The desk pounder, the you're wrong, the fighter, that makes me do my homework. It keeps me on my toes. If I surround myself with everybody who thinks I'm wonderful, I'm lost. And that's the same thing that could happen in this big team that we have now. It's sort of healthy to have somebody who's really not a team player, isn't it? It's sort of healthy to have the guy that constantly does the end runs, who's out to submarine all the rest of us. It's pretty smart.
That's an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea. Yeah.
See, the thing you have to know is who is it? And once you discover that, and you know the end runs are going to be made, then you think, it's going to make end runs. It's okay.
Everybody just has to be on their toes to be that much better at what they do.
Oh, sure. Because I'm an officer in this company, I do my homework all the time. And everybody that works for me, I say, be sure to hire somebody who doesn't like you, who's just a little bit smarter than you are. Always hire people that you can learn from. It's one of the reasons I love working for Joe. My learning curve had sort of flattened out. And working for Joe, my learning curve is just unbelievable.
That's neat. That is. Makes it fun to come to work.
Yes, incidentally, and I'm starting to see a lot more of that in my own organization. I have an organization because of the flight attendant union and dining services, and the contingency plans, and the 50% airline, the 70% airline, the 80%. We're operations division. I have people in my organization that went 5 months without a day off.
Oh, my.
No one's ever said anything about it. Their wives aren't too fond of us, but yeah. And it isn't that we said you have to work 7 days a week. It was there to do. And when it isn't there to do, I walk in their office and say, get out of here and go play golf. Get out of here. So we've been through a trauma, and we say, I have staff meetings with my people and say, here's the philosophy of the Texas Air people as I feel it, as I hear it, see it. And here's what Mr. Lorenzo can do for us. And they are so excited. And you see, I always believe that whatever my attitude is towards something, I can influence everybody that works for me. That's my job. To set them on the right path. People say to me, gee, now that Lorenzo's taking over this airline, he cuts everything back. And I say, you have a greater opportunity than you've ever had.
That's really a great attitude. It really is.
Well, I think it's true. I think it's true. If you're really good in your job, and you're bright and you're dedicated, the Continental people are going to see that. The Texas Air people are going to see that. They're going to know where the strengths and weaknesses are. They're already looking at that. And they ought to be. If I invested $600 million in something, I'd be very careful about the people running my airline, wouldn't you?
I would think so.
And everybody walks away and says, well, it wouldn't be very fair of him to let some of the vice presidents go. My answer to that is, why not? If you bought a company, wouldn't you put some of your own people in there? The answer is yes. I mean, so we're all, we can all sit around this table and think, hope I'm one of them that survived. To an officer, none of us have considered that. We don't think about that. Not one of us. We think about? He's here to do the right thing for Eastern Airlines. He's here to make Eastern Airlines survive. A lot of people here would like to be here to help him do that. But the last thing any of them have thought about, any of the vice presidents, is what about me? I love them for that. I just love them for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's unique, but they are unique. I have a friend that he used to be director of dining services here. He has a very exciting job now. He's with a company in New Jersey, and his job is to acquire other businesses. And he says to me, the minute we buy a business, the president and the vice president always saying, well, what about me? What are you going to do with me? And he said, call me after a week after Texas Air had bought us and said, are you hearing any of that? I said, nobody has asked that. The officers have not even, that is not nobody. And he made me tune into that. And I said, I got to tell you.
Nobody's raising that issue.
And he said, well, are you worried about yourself? I said, I haven't given it any thought. That, we got to keep everything glued together and hand off something that Mr. Lorenzo can make profitable. Yeah. And I've been to lots of dinner parties with these guys, and besides, I'm sort of the big sister around here. I would know that if they were worried. They'd tell me.
Hmm. That really is that's very surprising to me. I would think that would be, because most of us do have our own
There's a couple.
concern.
There's a couple, but those. But the key players are just.
Where did you learn to be a manager?
Where did I learn to be a manager?
On the job, pretty much?
Pretty much. I went to a lot of management training things at the company, but I happen to be married to a guy who thinks I should take every opportunity to learn something. In my first years in management, when I became a manager, I always took 1 week of my vacation and went to maybe the University of Michigan and would take a week's course there or a 2-week course and I did that through the years.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you select the right people to work with you, together they teach you that. They say, for God's sake, that's the worst decision. Here's what's wrong with that process. And through that relationship, you finally put something together as a group that works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So again, it's having people around you that challenge you.
Oh, constantly.
And doing your best. Mm-hmm.
But they don't challenge in a threatening way. And it's not challenging in that you feel inadequate or incompetent. It's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of building on an idea, building on one another's ideas. But that's what I say to my people in the field that deal all the time with flight attendants. I have this philosophy that if somebody needs a favor or needs something, and you can meet that request by not adversely affecting another employee or costing your company money, do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's as easy to say yes it is no. You can say no every day because it's safe. Saying yes is more of a risk.
Mm-hmm. A lot of business has to do with just risk taking, doesn't it?
Absolutely, that's all it is.
Yeah.
I was reading a book on women in business, and don't even remember the name of it. But one of the quotes I remember in the book is that men see business as a process of negotiations. Women see business as a process of manipulation, because that's what it really is.
Hmm.
And in business, men are called strong negotiators. Women are called cunning manipulators. Same thing. Different words.
That's interesting. In other words, it's just the way you want to characterize it,
Oh,
but it
well,
actually is the same process.
Well, women are characterized as being manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a good buzzword for a businessman to use about businesswomen, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We laugh about that. Oh, to the point that when I want something, I'll call somebody on the phone, another officer or something, and say, "Can you be con today?"
May as well be straightforward about it, right?
And they say, "No, not today." And I say, "Okay." Because they're going to say that anyway. They're going to walk away and say, "Oh, God, she can manipulate me into anything." But the problem for women like me in business is that men are programmed to think that's what I'm going to do. And so before I even start on a process, I can't get anywhere. That when I first became an officer to work for, well, it was later. I had worked for Frank, but when I went to work for Russ Ray, the first day I worked for him, he said to me, "Now, let's have an understanding. You're not going to bet those big blue eyes at me and get everything you wanted." That's how we started. And I said, "I don't think I've ever been guilty of that." He said, "Well, I heard you are."
Mm.
And for 8 years, that was a problem for us. No matter what I asked for. He said, "Don't start that." It's awful.
Yeah.
And you know, he's been gone. He's now the president of PSA Airlines, San Diego. Last week I talked to him, and you know what he said to me? He said, "You know, Winnie, you really were a fine officer. Really one of the best officers I had." I said, "Why didn't you ever tell me that when I worked for you?"
Yeah, it's a good question. It really is.
Anyway.
Can you talk a little bit about the changes in the industry before and as a result of deregulation? That make a lot of difference from
Absolutely.
to what you did?
Not so much to what I did, aside from watching the competitive environment for food and beverage service. Watching more carefully the way we manned airplanes with flight attendants, because flight attendants became very expensive. And just putting that one extra flight attendant on there became a big cost issue.
Mm-hmm.
What is the average fare on the flight? What's the break-even load factor? What's the difference in the manning towards that goal? I mean, to that.
Okay.
I mean, it could make the. So yes, that part of it. But in my job, other than those things, no. It's just more challenging. Our negotiations with caterers are a little bit more dig your heels in.
Mm-hmm.
We've assumed a little bit more aggressive role in that area. What are they going to do if we don't agree to the increase? On board food, I mean, we have the advantage. I always assume that
Mm-hmm.
we have the advantage in every situation. There are a few cities where there's only one caterer, but I wouldn't be beyond double catering an airplane somewhere else to avoid the station. Because years ago, when I took over dining services, I mean, talk about someone who didn't know anything about negotiating. I mean, I didn't even know. They assumed. I got dining services because they assumed women knew a lot about food.
Yes.
I mean, And I even said to Sam Higginbottom, I don't know anything about food. And I don't want dining services. He said, there's no choice. So when I got dining services and started learning a little bit about how they negotiated catering contracts, I was just appalled from looking at it with the new eyes. I mean, the people involved weren't appalled because that's how they had done things for years. And I couldn't believe that Eastern Airlines, there was one caterer in Atlanta. There was no choice who catered your airplanes. They could charge anything you wanted because there's nowhere to go. Well, I asked the Marriotts, I said, why don't you build a kitchen in Atlanta and compete with Dobbs? That what I thought we ought to do is have caterers compete for our business rather than the reverse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe that we could spend that kind of money and have nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
So now they compete for our business because we're a big business. We spend a lot of money.
Yeah, the number you said before for food is astronomical.
That's what we pay the Marriotts. We have 32 other caterers. We have a $100 million business with Marriott. Another 15 or 20 million with Dobbs.
Mm-hmm.
And we buy futures in dining services and coffee and orange juice. I have my dining service staff, they study the marketplace. When we change menus like that, if oranges are out of season, we change the menu immediately. We know when oranges are expensive and when they're not. We know what grapefruit in Seattle is selling for. That's our job.
That, in effect, can help a great deal with the profitability of the company.
Absolutely.
Just making changes in the menu.
Absolutely, and if we're not on top of a freeze in Florida for its citrus, then I had a problem with people who do that.
Mm-hmm.
But we are, and man, we can move right in and change a menu. That distresses our caterers. We're the only airline in the world that deals in many cents. I had a vendor tell me 2 weeks ago, no one else in the industry negotiates for half cents when he. I said, well, we feed too many millions of people a year for us not to get into the half cents. Yeah,
A half cent.
Everybody rounds off to the next penny,
Huh.
not us.
Yeah. The half cent does make a difference.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. Right down to knowing how many peanuts are in a pack.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
When you negotiate for a pack of peanuts and the guy's going to charge you 6 cents, well, you open the peanuts, and if he's charging you 6 cents for 30 peanuts and you start buying them for him, suddenly there's 10 in there, you didn't get a good deal.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to watch them.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So that's the kind of thing you would think of immediately, though, is it?
Oh, we do.
Uh-huh.
That's because that's what we do. I mean,
Mhm.
that's.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
Is there much learning from one airline to another? In other words, do you watch what other do, like in the
Oh,
food
we do.
service and other things like that?
Oh yes.
Mhm.
I have people that's what they do. Is at least once a month fly another airline just to look at the food service, and then when I fly, well, for instance, when Continental when Texas Air bought us, any trip I took after that, I tried to book myself on Continental, in coach,
To look it over. Yeah.
to look at the food
Mm-hmm.
and how they served it, what kind of carts they use.
Mm-hmm.
See, now that Mr. Lorenzo has sold the LaGuardia slots to Pan American, I will see to it that we know what's going on in the Pan American kitchen for those markets before they hit the street with it. We will make that our business to know that. So that we'll know what to do.
It's an interesting business, isn't it?
It's wonderful.
Yeah, it really is.
I better go to Joe's meeting.
Okay, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and being so candid and frank.
I am pretty candid.
Yes.
It's
yes.
a,
I think you have that.
it might be a fault.
Seems to me you're doing pretty well with it. You're doing very well with it.
Well, it depends. It depends. The chauvinism is alive and well, my friend.
Is that true of the industry generally?
I can't answer.
Yeah.
It is here.
Yes. Yeah. Those things take a long time to change.
Unbelievable.
Long time to change.
That happens not to be true with Joe. I'm starting to believe that. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Joe said, "Trust me." I said, "I'll see."
That comes from a lot of experience on your part
Yes.
with people saying one thing and doing another.
Well, it's just like years ago, Frank Borman was introducing me in a meeting. People
Mhm.
standing. Said, "This is our token lady vice president." And of course, I could bit my tongue off later. I said, "And I work for our token astronaut."
Very good.
Because I thought, I can't go through my career
Yeah.
just smiling through all that.
Yeah.
That I don't want to.
Yeah.
And the reason I don't want to is because I was one of the first in the industry. Well, I was the first. That I told my husband when I took this job that I had so much to learn that it would really interfere with our marriage. And that we had to have an understanding. And he said, "I'll give you 3 years to learn your job," my husband. And I would be here to 3 in the morning with my guys teaching me. I came to work in this organization. I didn't know anybody did. And I met with these men who were a little tight-lipped about. They promoted a stewardess to vice president. I mean, it wasn't easy, but
Mm-hmm.
I said to these guys, "Look, if you want me to appreciate what you do, you're going to have to teach me what you do so I can understand it." Now that puts you in the role of teaching your boss her job.
Yeah.
Do you want to do that? And they said, "We'll give it a try." And those guys, until 2 in the morning sometimes 3. I mean, allocations of flying, how you do it. I didn't even know the fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would teach. And I'd say, "Let me ask one more question." Because my husband said to me, the one thing you have to learn is put your ego aside. Get rid of your ego for a while. And if you come off looking dumb, that's all right. Get through that.
Mm.
And it wasn't easy. And I would say, I would say to these guys, "I didn't understand one word you said. Start over." And they would start over. Until finally one day when they got me through it and tested me, they thought, "Hooray!"
She
and
got
so
it.
they feel that they've created me.
Huh? That's very interesting. It really is. Uh-huh. It worked.
Wow.
Thank you very much. Here, let me take that.
Oh, I get it.
Thank you. No, appreciate your time. Enjoyed it very much.